At least 25 people killed in Australia's worst massacre.
Meet Martin Bryant, a name synonymous with one of Australia's most shocking tragedies. A man who, born on May the 7th, 1967, murdered 35 people and left 23 injured. What was the reason behind the attack? And how did he single-handedly change the gun laws in Australia?
Martin, do you remember the 28th of April, Sunday the 28th of April this year?
No, I don't.
Bryant was an ordinary Australian, but he was transformed into Australia's most notorious mass murderer due to his involvement in the Port Arthur Massacre on April the 28th of 1996, in the tranquil historical site of Port Arthur, Tasmania, where he executed a maniacal killing spree that left 35 innocent lives lost and 23 others severely wounded.
You know what's happened on that day? 28th of April? You don't. I'm sure about that.
Now, Bryant's case wasn't a result of momentary madness. Rather, multiple facets played significant roles in paving the way for this gruesome event. Some of these factors included Bryant's difficult childhood, marked by bullying and a lack of academic progression, his strained relationship with his father and his growing isolation from society at large, his limited understanding of the implications of his actions due to a subnormal IQ and mental health issues. Here's a brief overview of Martin Bryant's case. The crime committed was mass murder. The number of victims was 35 dead and 23 injured. He's now serving 35 life sentences without parole. But let's take a further look into the case of Martin Bryant. The Port Arthur Massacre became a defining moment in Australia, leading to drastic changes in the nation's gun laws. Remembering the incident serves as a reminder of the need for more effective mental health services and stricter gun control. And despite the passage of time, the impact and the severity of Bryant's actions continue to resonate, making his name a permanent fixture in the dark annals of criminal history. Let's look at the early life of Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant, known as Australia's most notorious mass murderer, was born on May the 7th, 1967, in Hobart, Tasmania, one of the most tranquil parts of Australia. Much of Martin's early life, perhaps surprisingly, was as ordinary as any child's, at least on the surface. He was born into an unassuming working-class family. His father, Maurice Bryant, was a hard-working man who owned a small gardening business. His mother, Carleen Bryant, was a dedicated homemaker and a doting mother. Not much else is recorded of Bryant's siblings or any other immediate family members. However, as Bryant grew older, behavioral issues began to emerge, puncturing the facade of normalcy. Now, here are some of the critical events and manifestations from his early years. There were failed attempts of social integration at school, expulsion from a special education facility, and a display of increasingly peculiar and violent tendencies. Martin Bryant's early life was far from perfect, and whilst it doesn't absolve him of the heinous crimes that he committed later, it does provide us with a clearer understanding of the man who committed the deadliest lone gunman massacre in Australian history. We're going to delve a little deeper into Bryant's troubled adolescence and how these formative years contributed to the monstrous man he became. As early as childhood, Martin Bryant showed signs of mental distress and abnormal behavior, hinting at the darkness that was to unfold in his later years. His disturbed personality was marked by a series of events and patterns that shaped his infamy as Australia's most notorious mass murderer. Now, from a tender age, Bryant was described by many as a problematic and disturbed child. There were bouts of uncontrollable temper, a sense of loneliness, and a tendency towards violence, which marked his early years.
I'd often find toys that were broken at a very young age, that was.
What, broken in temper or?
Yeah, I don't know, whether temper, frustration.
There was social isolation. Bryant reportedly had trouble fitting in with his peers and often found himself socially isolated. This inability to form healthy social relationships continued into his adult life. There were also numerous accounts of Bryant torturing animals, highly concerning behavior at the very least, which is often linked with sociopathy, and there were learning difficulties. Bryant's academic performance was noticeably challenged. Records indicate that he had an IQ of 66, which indicates a significant intellectual impairment. Now, whilst never formally being diagnosed, many believe that Bryant showed signs of various psychological disorders throughout his life, and this included traits that are consistent with schizophrenia and antisocial personality disorder. And it's pertinent to mention that such signs are not definitive predictors of violent tendencies, but rather highlight the importance of addressing mental health concerns early. Bryant's story is an unfortunate example of how untreated mental health problems can culminate into horrific outcomes.
Yes, he was annoying, like most boys are, especially with their sisters. But as he got older and Lindy started bringing a few friends home, or they would bring her up, he started turning very nasty.
We're going to delve a little deeper into Martin Bryant's heinous act at Port Arthur and its aftermath, a dark Australian history that led to significant changes in the country's gun laws. Here are some of the details of the massacre and the events leading up to it. Martin Bryant, widely known as Australia's most notorious mass murderer, committed the horrific act known as the Port Arthur Massacre on April the 28th of 1996. Bryant carried out a killing spree that resulted in 35 deaths and 23 injuries.
What would you think about a person who has killed 35 people? What would be your opinion of that person?
That's a wicked, awful, horrendous thing. I don't know.
Before the fateful day, Bryant's life was filled with tragedy and turmoil. His father's suicide and a denied inheritance reportedly fueled Bryant's anger, contributing to his mental instability. On the morning of the massacre, Bryant visited the Port Arthur historic site, a popular tourist spot, armed with a vast arsenal which included an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Bryant proceeded to enter the Broad Arrow Cafe, and his murderous rampage began.
People died altogether, including the people at Seascape, 35.
And there's people injured. Many?
Quite a lot.
Approximately 20.
Here are some of the key highlights of the massacre. Bryant began his shooting spree at the Broad Arrow Cafe, killing 20 people within a mere 2 minutes. He then moved to the car park and continued his rampage, claiming more lives. He proceeded to the toll booth where he murdered 4 people, including a mother and her 2 children. Overall, the Port Arthur Massacre is a grim reminder of one of the darkest days in Australian history, which led to sweeping changes in the country's gun laws.
There is absolutely no right to bear arms in the community. There is a right to community safety, and we're seeing that right to safety completely disregarded while politicians cower in fear of what the gun lobby can do to their electoral hopes.
I believe that the public of Australia are looking for urgent and immediate reaction.
I will not retreat an inch from the national responsibilities I have in relation to this whole issue, not an inch.
But despite the passing years, the impact of this tragic event continues to reverberate, reminding us all of the importance of mental health support and stringent gun control legislation. The unfortunate events that unfolded on that tragic day in 1996 initiated one of the most extensive police investigations in Australian history.
Inside the Seascape Lodge, the man, armed with several high-powered rifles, continued firing at police, who were trying to negotiate by phone.
Martin Bryant, identified by surviving witnesses, was arrested the day of the massacre after an 18-hour standoff with authorities. The preliminary investigation aimed to link Bryant irrefutably to the crime scenes, and this entailed meticulous gathering and analysis of forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony.
I'm sure you'll find the person that holds scores.
I don't find that a very funny statement at all, mate, to be quite honest.
Should have put that on recording.
Oh, it's still recording at this present stage, so that is on recording.
These efforts were instrumental in solidifying Bryant's role in the crime and subsequent legal proceedings. The collected evidence included multiple firearms relating to the shootings discovered in Bryant's possession, eyewitness testimony aligning Bryant with the perpetrator's description and actions, component forensic examinations that eventually cemented his connection to the crime. Bryant initially pleaded not guilty, as collected and documented evidence further implicated him, though. Bryant eventually changed his plea to guilty on November the 7th of 1996, sparing Tasmania from potentially one of the costliest and most distressing trials in its history.
Certainly right after Port Arthur, and it was the right thing to do. The way they approached it, and they gained a huge amount of support for it.
The trial itself was swift. On November the 22nd, 1996, Bryant was found guilty and sentenced to 35 life sentences without the possibility of parole for his heinous acts. The process was a testament to Australia's swift and thorough investigative practices, leading to a swift conclusion of the trial phase and much-needed closure to a traumatic event that shook the nation. Keep in mind that reviewing such events can be distressing, and the hope is that by understanding these instances, we can foster a more peaceful and a safer future. Analyzing the motives and the psychology of Martin Bryant, Australia's most notorious mass murderer, provides insight into the reasons that may have led him to commit such a heinous crime.
What about the dead people? Where does it say? What does it say about them? It doesn't say.
Well, what he wanted to say, well, why would it have Port Arthur Massacre?
No, but where does it say how many people were killed there?
Now, the experts largely speculated that a combination of factors, an intellectual disability, a troubled childhood, and psychological issues might have contributed to Bryant's motives. As for the intellectual disability, Bryant's mental impairment meant he had a lower than average IQ and significant learning difficulties. This possibly led to feeling socially alienated, which could have contributed to his violent outbursts. Bryant was diagnosed with multiple psychological conditions throughout his life, including depression and schizophrenia, which have a tendency to distort a person's perception of reality and potentially fueling violent impulses. Currently, Martin Bryant, known as Australia's most notorious mass murderer, resides in full-time confinement in Wilfred Lopez Centre, a secure mental health facility located near the Risdon Prison Complex in Tasmania, Australia. Current whereabouts and ongoing confinement. Martin Bryant is serving 35 life sentences without the possibility of parole at the Risdon Prison Complex. Due to his violent actions and the high-profile nature of his case, Bryant has spent the majority of his sentence in solitary confinement for his safety and the safety of others. Bryant's current location, the Wilfred Lopez Centre, is a high-security forensic mental health facility. This institution provides ongoing psychiatric care to patients who are a high risk to themselves or the community, offering a significant level of security. Here are the key details regarding his status. Location: Wilfred Lopez Centre, Tasmania. Sentence: 35 life sentences with no possibility of parole. Security: high level. Occupies a solitary confinement cell. While the heinous acts of Martin Bryant have left an indelible mark on Australia's history, his ongoing confinement within our high-security centre ensures society's safety. Moreover, it serves as a stark reminder of the importance of gun control laws and mental health support in society. Thanks for watching. Would you rather share a jail cell with Martin Bryant or walk into your bedroom to find a wasp's nest? Let us know in the comments section below.